We're joined by Aarathi Prasad, who is a biologist, writer, and is based at the University College London. Aarathi has presented several television and radio programs for BBC Radio 4, Channel 4, the Discovery Channel, and National Geographic. Her first book, which was called Like a Virgin, How Science is Redesigning the Rules of Sex, was published in 2012 and has been translated into Dutch, Bulgarian, and Italian. Her second book, In the Bone Setter's Waiting Room, Travels Through Indian Medicine, was published 2 months ago and was featured as BBC Radio 4's Book of the Week. Aarathi, welcome to LitFestx.
Thank you for having me. I think it's a wonderful idea to have an online festival that so many people can access, really.
Thank you. So, Aarathi, getting on to our topic, which is, one cure for all ails. You've obviously done a lot of research, and as a biologist, there is an entire spectrum of medicine available globally, and more so in India, where you've got traditional home remedies, homeopathy, Ayurveda, naturopathy. The list goes on, and you've done tremendous amounts of research there. So tell us a little bit about broadly your findings in this area.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert in medicine, or what we would call here alternative medicine, but I took a very journalistic approach, and I wanted to capture stories from around India to understand what people were using and why they were using it. And as you say, India is a particularly interesting place because culturally, these traditions are so important. And if even you go away from the professionalized systems like Ayurveda and like Unani, for example, there's a whole host of folk systems, or what my mother calls Party Vedyam, which is the grandmother's kitchen cupboard medicine. So every kitchen, every home, every recipe has some elements of medicine. So I was also particularly interested because India does have a problem. You can't get away from the fact that there's a real lack of medical care, and there's a huge rural population, and access to medication and hospital is very difficult. And the idea now, as it was in 1947 at independence, was to really think about how can there be access to health for all people, all socioeconomic groups, and take into account cultural context. So I wanted to see, and the book's not only about traditional forms of medicine, it's trying to capture a range of what's happening in India today, from low tech to high tech, from folk to neuroscience. But yeah, I think in order to look at how are you going to fill this gap, and how are you going to take into account what people understand or feel comfortable with using, and how it's used in different socioeconomic groups. It's a very important understanding going forward.
India has, in many ways, been at the forefront of traditional medicine, from centuries ago, right from the times our Vedas and Upanishads were written. There have been numerous instances of even modern practitioners referring to some of these home remedies, or like you said, kitchen remedies. But we've not been able to bring any of these to the forefront and take them to the world in a major way. What do you think is happening here?
That was one of the most interesting things I found, and I did some research in Bangalore towards this. In government research departments, so they're government-funded research departments today that are looking at traditional medicine. So they have databases of the herbs or the formulations that are used across different types of traditional medical systems in India. And what they're doing now is applying, I guess, modern scientific biochemical genetic methods of analysis to understand the mechanism of action of the drug, of the medicine, of the treatment. And they're not doing this, they told me, to see whether it works, because they said, we've been using this for thousands of years. We know that the treatment works. We just don't know how it works in modern terms. And because people are coming to us now and saying, you know, this is our blood pressure reading, this is our blood sugar reading, we need to be able to speak the language of biomedicine for the patients, but also, and these are the kind of terms they use, also to be able to compete with modern medicine, because otherwise traditional systems will get suppressed, and that would be a great loss. Now, a lot of modern medicines have come out of what used to be traditional or herbal, because plants have active ingredients, they have chemicals for the plant's own purposes, and that can be harnessed by the human body. But I mean, there have been setbacks, because while Indian forms of medicine were medicine in India, when the British came, not the Portuguese, because when the Portuguese came, they were integrating Indian medicine and using it with Western medicine. At the time, was much more similar to the theoretical ideas of Indian medicine, and the ideas of balance, for example, and the doshas, like the Western humours, the Greek humours. Then the British in the mid-19th century decided to ban the teaching of Indian systems of medicine as medicine. So you could learn about it as Indology or history or tradition, but you mustn't practice it. And that meant that people weren't being trained or wasn't recognized. And so I had an Ayurvedic doctor say to me recently, you know, if we'd been doing these studies, this kind of study that's looking into the way Ayurvedic medicines work, for example, and how to improve it or how to adapt it to different conditions, we would be where Western medicine is now today. And you know, there may be some truth to that. The systems, though, the basis for the systems are very different, and that's why even in 1947, when the government was trying to understand whether, now that the British have gone, should we bring back Indian systems of medicine? Should we bring it back in an integrated way? They expressed great doubt, and they decided not to do it because they thought the basis for the systems were too different. You know, one we see as a holistic sort of system. You're not just looking at the organ of the body that's diseased. You're looking at the whole body, maybe even the family situation at home, you know, how that person sits into their environment. And the separation of body and mind has been very acute in Western medicine. In a way, it's not in Asian systems. That, you know, you have to look at the body and the mind and the environment as a whole entity. So yeah, there was a lot of pushback against this. And even now, the people I've done research with in Bangalore, some of them are looking at food particularly, and ingredients that they bring from the forest particularly, to see how they can improve nutrition, for example, through Ayurveda. But they say, you know, there are in India, MBBS, the Western medical practitioners, who say, you know, don't use this nonsense. And then there are Ayurvedic or Unani doctors who say, don't, I mean, less Unani, but Ayurvedic doctors who recognize that the training for Ayurveda has changed substantially. It's become much more like biomedical studies. And they say, if you want to get a really deep understanding, you know, the system was, you would go to a Gurukul and you would stay there for many years, and you really know what every plant does. When you go to university for 3 years, and you're learning a range of biomedical subjects as well, you have less of a grip on it. So there are Ayurvedic traditional practitioners who are not happy with integration. There are MBBS doctors who are not happy with integration. But there's a large number of people now who are seeing the value in both. So my feeling is that going forward, because all of this research is happening, there are government research institutes in Unani and in Ayurveda. And, you know, there may be a meeting of minds here. And I say that particularly because if you look at, yes, there's still infectious disease in India, and there are problems like, India has the largest population of blind people, for example, but the diseases, the conditions that are rapidly increasing in India today are chronic conditions. So these are things that, and the world, but these are things that we live with for a long time, but there's no cure for. Diabetes, obesity, you know, also mental illness. You're looking at things that, how a person interacts with the environment. What are they eating? What kind of stresses do they have? For that, things like yoga, meditation, preventative, the idea of nutrition, the idea of staying healthy rather than fending off disease when you've got it, is very much grounded in the Asian tradition. And that could be something that's very important to India in the future, now, present, and future.
When you were doing the research for the book, what do you think was the perception in India towards the entire debate between whether modern medicine has its limitations and then, patients have to go towards the alternative side? So clearly, I mean, there are examples of, even MBBS doctors who've quit practicing modern medicine and are either doing homeopathy or Ayurveda or naturopathy. I'm sure those are few and far between, but it's emerging. So I'm sure your research would have given some more deeper sort of insights into this.
Yeah, I mean, what doctors at the integrated hospitals are seeing is that the kinds of patients they get, and it's exactly the same in the West, the kind of patients they get predominantly are those who have diseases for which Western medicine has no cure. So there's nothing that MBBS doctors can really offer them, except some kind of mitigation of the symptoms of the disease to feel better. But in the long term, you can't. It's not the root problem that's going away. Also, there's a real strong perception that MBBS, like modern medicine, biomedical medicine, causes harm, has side effects. And yes, I mean, there are risks associated with every medicine. It's just that in clinical studies, it's always balanced against the net benefit. There's a perception that in traditional systems of medicine, there is no side effects. That's not necessarily true, because again, they're using plants, and plants have chemicals in them. And it's not just about the thing that you're putting in your mouth and going into your body. But, one of the objections I've heard in the West is that if you're going to an alternative or a complementary practitioner and they're diagnosing you with something, maybe they're missing the full diagnosis because they're looking at it from one worldview. So really what's happening in India in testing the treatments is also something that a lot of doctors who work in the high ranks of the NHS or who are in wanting to improve healthcare, a lot of general practitioners are also saying that some of these treatments, where there looks like there may be evidence for why they work, they should be assessed, not ignored, but assessed. Because one of the doctors I spoke to said in London, he said, when we look at alternative ideas for our patients, so say a patient comes to me with depression or, and it's an Iraqi refugee and he's living alone in his room and he's traumatized. And this doctor saying, the doctor says, I was trained at medical school to give him a prescription, a medicine, but he's going to go back home to that same environment. So I have to look, he would like to look at the situation more holistically to see how he can improve and what kind of inputs that person needs to improve. That's not drug-based. And he said, it's not just that, people say these, and in India, it's true that, Ayurveda, sometimes Unani can be cheaper, and that's why people go to them, like bone setters, for example, much cheaper than an orthopedic surgeon. And also you're not put into a caste, so you're able to work and earn money. But this doctor in London was saying it's not just about the cost, it's about the fact that modern medicine is deficient. It's a deficient system of just giving a drug and not looking at wider. So the way that the NHS wants to move forward, they wrote a report 2 years ago about the next 5 years, is includes looking at things like nutrition, like prevention, like mental illness in a what they call social prescribing as well as drug prescribing. But yeah, I think the idea that medicine always has to fight against is side effects, that it might make you better for one thing, but it'll make you sick for another thing. Sure. Or that it doesn't take into account the whole person. And the thing that Ayurveda is fighting against particularly, is that I think Western medicine is seen as fast acting.
Yes.
So, you know, it's like two sides of the coin. If you want fast acting, you probably will have side effects, and it gets straight to the point. One of the Ayurvedic doctors told me, though, it's not that Ayurveda is not fast acting, it's just the diagnosis to understand truly what the person has and where it sits in their system takes time. The system of diagnosis and testing takes time. The treatment shouldn't. But it's, if you're talking to someone about their lifestyle, you know, it could be a painful pill to take, to tell them, no, you need to exercise.
Absolutely.
It's not a magic bullet. You need to eat healthily. You can't go to McDonald's. You know, these are, I heard a story, I can't remember where it came from. I think it was about a king who was very, very overweight and very ill. And the doctor, or I think it was something like a holy man sort of doctor he went to, said, there is some dew on a plant that's in a forest 5 miles away. You need to wake up every morning and at 4 a.m. and go to that plant and drink the dew, and that will make you better. Of course, it had nothing to do with the plant or the dew. It was understanding that the man didn't get up and walk, and he got better and he lost weight. So it may not be a fast solution, but in the long term, if you look at chronic conditions, diabetes, obesity, things that lead to heart disease, then that wisdom of the long-term outlook, I think it's very important.
Right. No, that's very interesting. And clearly there's, I think the verdict is still out there, because you've got all your mainstream media, press, your medical journals, where clearly traditional medicine, alternative medicine have very little room for coverage or discussion. And I guess what's also not helping, Aarti, is the powerful lobbies by your pharma majors and healthcare majors, who obviously don't have molecules or products in the Ayurveda or Unani space. And hence it's virtually very, very difficult for traditional medicine to sort of catch up to the ground they've lost to allopathy.
But I think it works both ways. I mean, for example, L'Oreal, I know it's not medicine, but in the cosmetic sense, has a research lab in India that's looking at Ayurvedic products. So it's looking at, and also the Ayurvedic research centers, when they go into the forest twice a year, they sometimes meet tribal people and ask them what plants are you using and for what purpose. You know, there was one I wrote about that the tribal people said that fruit of that plant is very good for infertility, for nutrition, but we also use it for infertility. And they said, for infertility, take it back to the lab, analyze it. This is Ayurvedic research. But why I'm saying there's a flip side to pharma lobby, and you know, you're not wrong. I mean, the pharma industry is an industry, it's a business. It's not necessarily about healthcare, it's also about profits. So, you know, people are right to be skeptical. But I think what doesn't help the alternative medicine camp is that they do have journals of research. They do have journals where they publish their research.
Sure.
And they're not always of a good quality. And they're you know, you can pick holes in them. There are and scientists can and do pick holes, and they say you know you're kind of grasping at straws here. You haven't conducted the study properly. However, there are studies that have been conducted very, very well. There was one in rheumatoid arthritis that was done by an American university in Pondicherry, I think. That wasn't, I can't remember the name of the university, but that's held up as a very good study. So I think there are models, but I think for what the West calls complementary alternative medicine, to try and show any evidence has to be on a par, which is not always easy, but it can be done, and it has to be done well. And I think it has to be done without emotion or defensiveness. That's something I didn't see in Unani doctors. I really admire them, because Unani, you know, obviously has come, you know, from Greek through the Arab world, evolved with the Arabic scholars and into Iran, Afghanistan, India. And through that time, there's always been an exchange of knowledge. So in the Syrian Caliphate, you know, they used to have Ayurvedic doctors go from India to talk to them about their systems of medicine. And so there was a lot of learning happening. And I feel that very strongly. Unani is still learning, and I don't feel an ego associated with it, because one of the doctors said to me, because he had a stethoscope on his desk and, you know, various, blood sugar monitoring. And I said, well, I thought I was going to see urine or pulse reading. And he does read pulses. He said, no, you know, we could do that. But a stethoscope is not, doesn't belong to modern medicine. It's a diagnostic tool. And I can use whatever tools they are to make my patients better, because ultimately that's my aim. So I think we must, Ayurveda, the word Ayurveda, it's a science, right? If it's a science, what we understand in Western science is science has to be critical of itself. You have to be able to say, this isn't working that well, let's rip it apart and understand why. And over time, Ayurvedic doctors have said that. In fact, I think it was 16th century or 17th century, there was an Ayurvedic doctor who said, Vaidya, who said, these humors, it resembles the babbling of lunatics. You know, we should look at this. We should look at this and revise it. It's not religion. This is why the British, one of the reasons the British tried to ban it, Macaulay was like, if people are believing in something that's rooted in Hindu tradition or Unani Islamic tradition, they're not going to accept Christianity or whatever, the new Western sort of morality. Sure. It's not religion, it's a science. And so I think if you recognize it's a science, you should recognize that it can and should be tested, and it can and should be improved.
Certainly. And I guess also, sorry, go ahead.
No, that I finished.
Yeah. So I said also what's not helped, I guess, is over the years, India especially has seen so many quacks practicing their own, version of alternative medicine, and I think the title of your book clearly alludes to that, bone setters. In every nook and corner, you will find quacks saying they can, set your bones just by, touching you in a particular way, right? Or setting it right very quickly. So, but very interesting research there, Aarathi, and I'm sure your book will find a lot of appreciation with readers both in India and abroad.
But thank you. But just on that note, I want to say every system has quacks. So sure. I think you'll find MBBS doctors or people who pretend to have those qualifications. Right. And there are also some very good bone setters and people who will pretend that they are. So that's where people go to audition.
Right.
No,
absolutely.
For all doctors.
Absolutely. That you find so many doctors who've been operating without a license for years.
And remember, there's more harm possible with
absolutely
if you're performing surgery or giving injection, you don't know what you're doing. Really, if you ask me what the one cure was for the ails of Indian medicine, I would say it's to get rid of poverty. Because why do people go to quacks? Why do people believe? Because they're free, because they say things that sound true. They don't have the leisure. There are people in Mumbai, fashionable types who are using pranic healing and whatever because they can. It's a leisurely. If you want to go to an Ayurvedic spa, as well as going to your very expensive hospital, everyone should have that option.
Absolutely.
Not just the upper 1% or less.
Absolutely.
So poverty impacts nutrition. Nutrition causes children to be born blind. It's a vicious cycle. Poverty and education.
Certainly
is the way forward. And the government needs to invest. The government needs to invest in the public healthcare system.
No, you're very right. I think we seem to be caught in many ways in this sort of a vicious cycle where poverty, lack of education, nutrition, so on and so forth are all coming together to impact sort of overall public health in the country. And we can only hope that this government is able to put some better measures in place compared to the previous governments. Let's see. I think only time will tell.
I think India is very good at saying this is wrong, we should stop this. I think people need to protest. People need to say health is not an option.
Sure.
This is the biggest resource of your country, of any country, is the human beings, the human resource. And by not providing healthcare, it's wasting all of these people's potential and all these children's potential.
Certainly.
It's wrong.
Certainly. On a separate note, whilst we bring this session to an end, I'm seeing a very interesting piece of art right behind you.
Yes.
Why don't you show it to us slightly more closer if you can, and tell us about it.
Oh, this is one of my favorite artists. It's a British artist called David Shrigley. Can you see it?
Yes, yes.
And it was from an exhibition called Brain Activity, and that's a taxidermy dog. So it's a dog that's stuffed, and he looks very alive. And the sign says, "I'm dead," and it's I guess it's a commentary on well, you can make of it what you want. It's just where life and death meets. I've never been. I've always been scared of neuroscience. It's my last chapter in the book is about a very amazing project in Daryaganj in Delhi, at the Shroff's hospital, a charity hospital for blind people. And the brain's really the last frontier, and there's life and death and understanding what consciousness is. It's the final frontier, I think, and how our brain interfaces with the body. And that impacts on medicine, because a lot of medicine, a lot of the things we do, especially in alternative medicine, people say is related to placebo, which is your belief that something's going to work, your belief in that holy man. It may not be evidence-based. So how important is evidence? Those things we still don't fully understand. But
yeah. Well, thank you so much, Aarathi.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it was fantastic talking to you, and wish your book all the success. Wish you continued success with all your TV and radio work as well. And good luck.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to say thanks to all the viewers, and I'm on Twitter. Give me a follow and say hello. So thank you very much, Kumaar.
Sure. Thanks. Bye-bye.